All right, I think we're ready now. We started a new series. There it is. Series concerning we walk by faith. And the byline for that is that from Mark, where the Lord talks to an individual about trusting Him, about having faith. And the guy responds saying, I believe. Lord, help my unbelief. And you know, that's really what we're going to be doing here in this series. Hopefully, for those who do believe, that we're going to be helping those areas that you yet need to trust Him in. And more we're going to do in this series. How important is your faith? This is a picture of The Walk. As a matter of fact, that's taken right from The Walk. It's a film that is out, and the film is about the guy, him. This is a actor portraying him. I'll show you his real picture in a moment. A guy who tightrope walked between the Twin Tower buildings at the top when they were being yet constructed. They weren't quite finished. They're getting ready to open. And this is a representation of his practicing to do that. And on his back is a girlfriend of his. And that is a position of trust. Right? Trust me. I don't know. Trust me. Let me show you a photo. This is also from the film of them depicting him at the top of the Twin Towers. And he actually stayed out there for quite a while, and he did that right there. He laid down on that tightrope that he had to put up, because this obviously was an illegal thing to do. He had to put up overnight so that he could do this. And it's an interesting film. It's called The Walk. His name was Philippe Petit, and he was from France. And he came to do that. Let me show you a real picture of him. There he is actually doing it, walking across the Twin Towers there. You see the day. And this is when he was coming in there. And it was quite a story to get him to be coaxed to come in. The Walk. That's the name of it. And you know, we walk by faith. And does it have this much drama to it? Well, can I tell you this? Sometimes. Sometimes it does. A lot of times it's kind of like this, our walk. And that is a walk of faith too. And sometimes, well, always, it has this much parental care from God in this walk, even when it seems like that, okay? There is still the Lord's parental care on this. Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief. How important is faith? God says this to us. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. That's what He says, straight up. Unless you have this faith thing, you are never, ever, ever going to please God. He will never be pleased with you. Never, ever. Did I make that strong enough? Unless you have faith. He never will. How important is it? You're never going to please Him without it. Also, the Bible tells us this, that by grace you have been saved through faith. Your rescue is totally through faith. Completely. Through your trust in what God has done for you in Christ. Trust me. Will you trust me? Trust me on this. Without faith, it's impossible to please Him. And it's through that faith that you're rescued, and you'll never be rescued any other way ever. Also, the Bible tells us this, being justified by faith, we have peace with God. It is by the faith that we have settled harmony with Him. You'll never justify yourself. The only way that you can be justified for anything before God is by faith. And it's by faith that we have this peace through our Lord Jesus Christ. How important is it? Can't please Him, no rescue without it. There's no peace because there's no way to justify yourself. That's how important it is. Seems to be pretty important to me. And the Bible doesn't stop there. It says, once you have this rescuing faith, you shall live by it. You shall live day by day, hour by hour, week by week, moment by moment. You're going to walk by this faith in Him. It pleases Him. He rescues you here. It justifies you and gives you a settled harmony. There's harmony here and now. Week by week, day by day, hour by hour, you walk, trusting Him. Trust me with this. Trust my direction on this. Trust where I'm going in your life with this. Trust me with this. Trust me? Trust me. It's our series. We walk by faith. Oh Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Because there are spots that are still, I'm not. And we know it, right? Do we know it? Do we know it? Do we know it? That there's still spots where I am not. I'm thinking, yeah, we should know. You know, that's so important that 3 times over the Lord tells us in the New Testament alone that how we're going to live this life, how we're going to go through this, it shall be by your trust. It shall be by your faith. This is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to go well. You shall live by your faith. And that comes from the Old Testament, the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 14, and verse 4, rather. And that is quite a situation where he brings that up the first time. And the New Testament authors then, 3 times over, bring out, this is how it's going to go for us. This is our series. You know, the sad thing about this thing about faith is that so often this thing of trusting me with that, like this, you see, God looks for this component like that component of faith in our life. Just get on my back and I'll take you. He looks for that. The problem is, a lot of times that faith thing is left so open. It's never really told to us. It's never really defined. It's never really given content as to what we're to put faith in. Let me give you an example. This is a true living example. It happened in the experience of our church a number of years ago, not Heartland, a number of years ago, another church in the Chicago area. There was a young man, I'll call him Bill here, just to not, in case we'd still have contact with him, so in case he has this, he'll know I didn't spill the beans totally. It's Bill. It's not his name, but I'll call him Bill, okay? Bill had a very tragic accident. He was actually on a ski trip that the church was promoting. And on this trip, Bill had a car that in the ice slipped off the road, hit a pole, and split apart. And his girlfriend future wife, according to their plans, was with him. She had injuries that were internal, that were unknown. And in the hospital, she passed away from this accident. And close members of Bill's family were telling him, hang on, faith. Keep faith. Hold on to faith. You got to have faith. Keep faith. And I was with those close members, and I was getting increasingly provoked. Because faith in what? Faith in who? Faith in how? Well, faith in God, but how am I going to trust Him in this? What is the content of what I'm supposed to do here? What do I do with this? And that's the problem that we have with this walk by faith. We never really give it much content, defining what we're to do to go moment by moment, hour by hour, minute by minute, trusting Him with this. And that's what that series is about. That's what this series is to do. We walk by faith so that this component, like that, comes from us as that child, like faith. We started this actually last week when Dr. Stewart took us to 2 John. I want you to turn there again for a moment. Book of 2 John. And as you're turning there to 2 John, I want to highlight that this is how we're going to approach it. Next week, the tables come back, okay? Because we're going to beef up the way we're going after this faith thing. We're going to take the first 3 weeks of this to look at the exposition of the Word of God concerning faith being walked out in your life. There are 3 epistles close to the end of the New Testament, 2 John, 3 John, and the book of Jude, just short little notes that are specifically focused on this thing of walking by faith. He calls it walking in the truth, 2 John, 3 John. And then Jude, big time, talks to us about this faith now, present, in our lives, functioning. How's it to go? Dr. Stewart last week took us to 2 John, and we highlighted from what he said this thing. 2 John, there's only one chapter. 2 John chapter 1, verse 8, where he says this, watch yourself.
We distilled this thing down to watch yourself. He spoke to us about watching yourself. He goes like this in 2 John verse 8. Only one chapter. It's hard to do that. You turn the chapter together and get to watch the noise of that. Just keep going and help me out. Watch yourself so that you may not lose what you have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, don't encourage him. Don't welcome him. Don't support him. Don't give him a greeting. Don't. For whoever greets him partakes in what he's doing that is a wicked deed. Now, watch yourself was concerning what you're encouraging here. What you're for here. What you put up with here. That was this last week. Now this week, we go to 3 John. And 3 John, I get more attention. You're going to do that. What are you going to do next? Well, I see you got your knife out. That's interesting. 3 John.
In 3 John, we're going to boil this down too. Thanks, Josh. It came back. In 3 John, we boil this down too. 3 John talks to us about this. But imitate good. Look with me at verse 11. 3 John 11. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. what 3 John's about is about mimicking what's beneficial. And to convey to us what's beneficial, the Lord has John talk to us about 3 people. 3 people's lives. He names names here. He doesn't say, oh, here's an ethereal idea. He names names. And he says, look at this guy. And he's going to tell us about these 3 guys, and he's going to point out what not to imitate, what not to mimic, and what to mimic. For this walk of faith, this moment by moment, week by week, hour by hour, step by step, trusting Him. He's going to bring it out just like real blatant. Here it is. These 3 people. And the 3 people that he gives here in 3 John, these 3 people are this. Gaius. That's one. Like Gaius. He talks about Gaius. And then he says, like Diotrephes. He talks about Diotrephes. And then he says, like Demas. And he talks to us about Demas. And he's going to talk about this thing of our walk. Hour by hour. Day by day. Moment by moment. Do we kind of get that by now? That's how the walk goes. So he's going to tell us about this 3. I'm going to give you the title in a little bit. I'm not going to give a title yet because I want to build to it. So here we go. We're going to talk about Gaius. And by the way, this is about you. This is about you. Okay? It's about your walk. I want you to do this with me. I want you to just sit for a moment. I want you to wiggle your toes in your shoes. Wiggle your toes. This is about faith and walking in truth, getting into your shoes. So that those toes, when they wiggle and you get up out of here, you carry out this is what God looks for in this component of faith. Me walking by it. That's what we're going after. It's you walking. It's in your shoes. That's what we're going for. Okay, let's talk about Gaius. Here we go. First of all, who is this Gaius guy? Who is this Gaius guy? We'll look at verse 1. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. I want you to know that Gaius was just an ordinary guy. As a matter of fact, it's really interesting. This is a really good commentary. As a matter of fact, D. Edmund Hebert, he has several on the New Testament. This is just right in par with the other ones he's done. In here, he talks about Gaius, and he says this, and I want to quote from him. He says, the name Gaius was one of the most common in the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, he points out that Gaius was the name that was selected like for John Doe, that we would use John Doe. They used Gaius because there were more Gaiuses around in the Roman Empire than anybody else. It was kind of like John. It's kind of like the name Tom around here. You know, let's see, there's Tom, and there's Tom, and then there's Tom, and there's Tom. And sometimes there's Tom, but that Tom's not there today. And there was your dad, Tom, and we just had Tom. It's a common name. Gaius was just an ordinary guy. That's it. He was a guy who John really loved. I love you in truth. Beloved Gaius, I love in truth. I love you genuinely. And he's going to talk about this being expressed here. That's who this Gaius guy was. He's just an ordinary guy. What was he up to? I want you to see this. John says that he prays for him, that he is just as healthy as he is spiritually sound in his soul. That you may be in such as good health as you have a good well-being in your soul. Verse 2. And then he says, I say this because, verse 3, the word for there is intentional. I say this because I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, that you are indeed walking in the truth. You see this, his toes in his shoes carried him along in a manner of behaving that was in line with the truth. So what was up here is that he was walking in the truth, and he was rejoicing in that. He goes on in verse 4 and he says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. He says it there twice. This is what I am really pleased about. This word joy is a word that means to have a smile inside. Do you have this? A smile inside? Sometimes you see something happen at the skating. I was kind of watching some of the young people out there with their skating, and you go by and they're all fired up and they're going and their skates are it's fun. And then you look over this guy here and he's skating backwards. You know how many years I've tried to skate backwards? I've been smiling so much over that. It's just the smile inside. You know what he was smiling inside about? He was smiling inside because people had come to him and they told him that this truth thing he was so in John, or so in Gaius, that he was walking in this truth. And that brings the smile inside. That his hour by hour, his day by day, his week by week, his moment by moment, he was doing this. Walking in line with the truth. And that just brought this smile. I have no greater smile on the inside than to hear that going on. That's what Gaius was up to. Walking in the truth. Living life in line with the truth. Say this with me. Living life in line, say it. Living life in line with the truth. That's the smile that comes inside. It's the one that ought to be provoked in us for others. It's the one that we ought to provoke in others. Smile when you hear this. That's what Gaius was up to. Just an ordinary guy, just one in a million in the Roman Empire, named Gaius. But he was doing this, and John genuinely loved him because the smile of him walking in line with the truth. Have you ever had somebody that you know, and when you hear how they're going at life in their world and the response, and that this truth is coming out, it just kind of makes you go, all right. You ever have that? I mean, do you think of anybody like that? Does anybody, you suppose, think of you and get that? That's, just a week or two ago. I was in the mayor's office. It came up about this walking in the truth, this discussion. It just kind of brought that smile inside. There's no greater joy. Greater joy. That's what Gaius was up to. Say this with me. Living life in line with the truth. That's what we're after here. Now let me add this. I'm going to take that up. This too, how this went. How was it playing out that he was living life in line with the truth? That's what he talks about right here. And this really gets to the point that John is after when he talks to him here. He says, beloved, who we know as Gaius, he says, verse 5, it's a faithful thing you do, living life in line with the truth. It's a faithful thing you do in all your efforts. Specifically how it went, for these brothers, strangers as they are to you, who testify to your love before the church. That was the testimony he heard. It was these brothers who had came down to the area where Gaius was living his life out, day by day, hour by hour, and the way that Gaius was responding to these guys and interacting with these guys as they saw him in his life sphere, his circle. They came back with this testimony. It's a faithful thing. I'm going to, at this point in time, put it in here. Faithful in all you do. And now we get to the title of this thing. Faithful in all your efforts. That was Gaius. This word faithful that's used right up here, you see that word? And it's used there, and it's used in that verse 5. What it means is you're living life in harmony with your beliefs. It's faithful. You are reliable in living life in line with your beliefs. Faithful. Living life in line with all your beliefs, in all your efforts. That's what he said to Gaius. It's a faithful thing you do in all your efforts, in all you're doing. You're living life in line with your beliefs. That's what we're going after. That's what it is. That's how this went. And it went like this, folks. It was just like there were other believers coming down looking to have ministry in this area, and he was receptive to them, and he was encouraging to them, and he was supportive of them. And in that, John saw that he was living life in line with all his beliefs. Isn't that amazing? It's this huge thing that he just encouraged those who were walking like they're to walk. And John said, wow, that's faithful. That's faithful. What? Encouraging those whose life going on in line with their beliefs. Sometimes believers compartmentalize their life. You know what that is? Here's my compartment for Christianity. The way I talk, the way I look. And then here's my compartment for partying. And here's my compartment for playing a baseball game. And here's my compartment for dealing with somebody who cuts me off in the road. and here's my compartment for managing my money. And it's like, we got to kind of pull these together. Gaius, faithful, was living life in line with his beliefs, with his faith, with the truth. That's where he was walking. How is it shown? Well, that's what we have to deal with next, okay? So let's do that. Let me move this up, and let me deal with this. Where this showed up. Look with me at verse 8. He says, get to verse 8, go through verse 5. It's a faithful thing you do. The brothers who are strangers to you come down. They testify you before the church that you send them on their way, verse 6, in a manner worthy of God. Because these brothers, they went out for the sake of the name of Jesus Christ, for the name, accepting nothing from the people that they were attempting to reach, the Gentiles, accepting nothing from them. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that they may be, that you may be, that we may be, that all of us may be fellow workers for the truth. That's what he says here. This showed up in what he supported. We ought to support these kind of people. You know what that means? I'm going to support this book. Okay? Pick it up and I take it along. That's the word that he used here, and that's what it means. That you take something up and you carry it along. We ought to take up these people and help carry them along. Why? Because their actions are for the sake of the name, to promote the reputation, the image, the understanding of the name. Not to make it different than it is, just to let it be known how it is. For the sake of the name. That was him living life in line with his faith. I want you to know that there were some obstacles to this for him. There were some obstacles. You know, I wish I could, I'd just love to do this. I'd love to go around the room and just tell you the story of so many people in this room. Okay? I could tell you the story of how their faith comes out, how it's being shown. That would take me a while, and it would probably be somewhat embarrassing to them. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to tell you one story. This is a story that had to do with a congregation we were at a number of years ago, up in the Chicagoland area, the same congregation which Bill lived. We're in that fellowship. And of course, you know, as a pastor, you do several different things for the fellowship. One of the things was you had funerals. And there was this funeral home that I had been to several times. And I went into the funeral home because of a contact through the church taking care of the funeral. And the funeral director, who I knew already, he stopped me. He said, "Hey, Tom, I want to tell you something." He said, "The people in your church handle this whole thing here, being here, so much different than a lot of people." And I want you to know what that did. That was a testimony that brought a smile inside. Because I got an opportunity to talk to him about a hope that even though there is sorrow, it's not without hope, you see. And it had an impact on the people. His testimony was spread abroad. Gaius had a testimony that was going out. But like every testimony, every walk for Christ, there are obstacles. There are things that are opposing this, attempting to stop this from happening in your life. As a matter of fact, there is a person who has a name called the opposer, the adversary. You ever heard that name? Who is that? Is he real? Is he alive? Is he on the planet? Every testimony of walking by faith will have an adversary sent to it. I want you to know Gaius was no different. And I want you to know that sometimes this adversary will be right in the church. Did churches in the New Testament have problems? I remember people coming to me when the church was going through problems and saying, "Why can't we just be like the New Testament church?" I was hoping we kind of were. Number two, do you know what God did in the New Testament church? That there were people that were carried out dead in the New Testament church. Why can't we be like that? I'm for it. New Testament church, he was supporting, because this was in line with the faith. By the way, how do you do with supporting? Are there obstacles to your supporting? I mean, supporting with encouragement, getting up and carrying along financially. Are there obstacles for you to keep you from those who are carrying on ministry, promoting this for the name's sake? Are you encountering obstacles to supporting this thing financially? See this? This was Jesus talking about someone's giving, financially supporting God's work. This was when he was on the planet and was the temple. And it was about a widow. And there was a widow who had 2 copper pennies. It was all. And Jesus was sitting across from the place, like in the back there we have that little treasure chest box. He was sitting across the place from the treasury like that. And this widow just comes through and puts in her offering. And Jesus says to his followers, he says, "See that widow? I want you to know that that widow put in more than everybody else. Because they gave out of their abundance. They weren't going to have to scrimp and cut back and all of this. But she, out of her poverty, what she had to live on, and I want you to know that she gave more than them all. Because this thing isn't how much you give. This thing is how valuable it is for you to pick this up and carry it along, even though there are obstacles. We're going to talk about the obstacle. That is faithful. In line with your faith, I'm putting my money where my belief is. Now let's talk about the obstacle. Like Diotrephes, don't do this. This is the obstacle. What? It's a person. We just saw him name names about Gaius. Now he's going to name names about Diotrephes, and he starts at verse 10, and he says this, verse 9. He says this, I've written something to the church. I've written a note to the church about support of these people, carrying them along, giving it, and in this writing, there's this Diotrephes. But Diotrephes, okay, so who is this Diotrephes guy? He talks about him. Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first. The word that he uses here is preeminent. You know what I think is really important? The way I want to this go is like, whoo, big time. My idea, what I think is valuable, where this ought to go, what we ought to use the money for. Diotrephes wanted to call some things. He wanted to direct things. It's really interesting about Diotrephes. A guy named A.T. Robertson, who was a Greek grammar specialist, used to write for a paper that was distributed through his fellowship at churches. And he wrote on Diotrephes. He did an exposition of Diotrephes here. And the editor of this paper, who managed it, came to him and said, when you wrote that article on Diotrephes, 25 people canceled their subscription because of personal attacks in the paper. Now, these were deacons. A.T. Robertson recorded Diotrephes is in the church. He was an obstacle because he wanted his way. I've seen this before in the church. Now, really, who ought to get his way in the church? Pastor? Should it be the pastor? No, not always. How about the elders? Should it be the elders? How about the deacons? Congregation. The congregation ought to call it, right? Who gets his way in the church? The Lord. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not the church. Right? It's an organization that calls itself a church, but it's not the church, because the church is his called out assembly, and they are going with him. And sometimes the pastor has to be corrected about what the Lord said, and he needs to go, yeah, wow. Well, I guess I'll be a Diotrephes here. No, I guess I better not be a Diotrephes here. Okay, so the Lord is the one. And Diotrephes wanted to be the one. He wanted to be first. That's what it was. Who was this guy? This guy is the guy in the church who's the obstacle. Okay, and now we're going to talk about what he was up to here. What was he up to? It looks like this. Diotrephes, who likes to be first, does not acknowledge our authority. The authority of the apostles speaking from God, they didn't acknowledge it. So if I come, verse 10, I will bring up what he is doing. This is what he was up to. I will bring up what he's doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. This guy was dissent. This was junk talk. This was putting it down. Okay? What was he doing? He was saying things that intentionally undermined what the apostles were saying. What Apostle John was giving as directions to walk in a manner that was faithful to God. And he was intentionally going against it. Does that happen in the church? Could that possibly... that surely can't be a New Testament church. What do you think? Is this the New Testament? Is that the church? Yep, I guess it could be. This is the obstacle. This is the obstacle to Gaius. As a matter of fact, this is the obstacle to the advance of God's church repeatedly, over and over, over and over and over. You know what? People here who've been in the church for a while, you know this, don't you? You've seen this. Somebody going against the authority of God in the church and just causing major disruption. That's what he was. Now he wants to be first. This is how it went that he did it. Verse 9. He doesn't acknowledge the authority. Number 2, he talks wicked nonsense, and he's not content with that. He refuses to welcome the brothers that are sent out for the sake of the name. And I want you to see this. I'm going to move this up. This was the out-of-line distinct, and I'm going to add this one. Where this showed up. This is how this thing showed up. The end of verse number 10. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers who are going out for the name. He stops those who want to. He's an obstacle to those who want to. He opposes those who want to do what the apostles said to do, that Jesus sent us out to do. He stops them and he puts them out of the church. Can you think of the audacity of this? This is Christ's church, and you're doing what Christ wants. Stop this, and you can't be in our church anymore because you're trying to do what Christ wants the church to do. But he was an influential leader, and he was getting his way in the church. That was unfaithful. That was not living in line with the truth. That was not living in line with the faith. He was living in line with what he wanted. You know, that's a potential danger for all of us. Do you know we all have wanters? You ever notice that? I noticed that Arabella has wanters. It's there. It's fully, well, maybe not fully grown up, but it's surely grown. And Alita tells me that sometimes she gets angry when she doesn't get what she wants. Can you imagine? Even at that age, she has her wanter. You know what? We all got a wanter. John Calvin said this, we're born wanters. We're wanters. And our hearts are a factory of idols, coming up with things that replace God. That's what Diotrephes was doing. He's replacing God with being first. That's where this shows up here. I'm just going to list them out there. He refuses, went too fast. He refuses to follow their authority. He stops those who are doing it, and he puts them out of the church. That is so bizarre. You and I sitting here right now in this context are thinking, that is so bizarre. Say this with me. That is so bizarre. That is so bizarre. That is so bizarre. Here's somebody who wants to do what the Lord said and pick up and support people for the sake of the name, and there's an obstacle because the guy says, don't support them. As a matter of fact, if you support them, you can't be in our club. We have obstacles to doing what the Lord wants. Okay, last one. Demetrius. Who is this guy? Demetrius. Look with me, verse 11. Beloved, this is to Gaius. Gaius, don't imitate what's harmful, the evil. Don't imitate Diotrephes. Don't imitate this, I'm going to call the shots, it's all about me, I'm going to throw a tantrum, I'm going to get my way kind of person. Don't imitate that. But instead, imitate what is beneficial, what's good. Whoever does what is good is from God. Who's ever doing what is beneficial is living life in line with the faith. This is from God. And whoever does what is harmful, like Diotrephes here, has not seen God. Demetrius, he has received a good testimony. He's doing what's good. He's living life in line with God, verse 11. Demetrius he's living life in line with God. And he goes on. What's he up to? Verse 12. This is what he's up to. Demetrius has a good testimony from everyone, from the truth, and I add my testimony as well. What he's up to is a good testimony. A beneficial thing is being said about him so that others are hearing it and there's a smile inside. And that is from everyone who gets exposed to it. That's from the truth itself. What he's doing is in line with what the Bible tells us to do, the truth. And John says, Gaius, I say it too. It's from me. And you know, Gaius, you know that our testimony is true on this. Demetrius, imitate what is good. 2 John, watch yourselves, don't encourage. What's out of line with Christ's teaching, don't encourage. And I don't care where it takes place. If it takes place in the university campus, don't encourage it. Don't throw your support behind it. If it takes place in a medical office, don't encourage it. If it takes place in the classroom, don't throw your support in behind it. But imitate what's good. Pick up and carry people, even when there's obstacles to it, even when there are who are holding forth the name of Christ. Imitate what's good. This is walking by faith. Now, he says, I got more to tell you. That's what John says at the end of this thing. By the way, this is the shortest book in the New Testament. 2 John is the second shortest. 3 John is the first shortest. They got turned around there in order. I'm not going to go through that again, lest we get confused. I confuse myself. 1 John is the shortest. It's one sentence shorter than 2 John. It's the shortest book in the New Testament, and it's about your toes wiggling in your shoes in a way that's in line with our faith. And he says, I've got more to talk to you about this. I do. But I'm not going to write to you about it. This is what I'm going to do. We're going to do it face to face. You see this on the back of your outline this morning? There are some questions there about 3 John for you doing this face to face with somebody, hopefully in your D band. That's what that's for. Beneficial to do it by yourself, but face to face. Our D band, guys in the D band, this is the highlight of the week. I mean, this is a charge. This is, all right, are you in that? I want you to know that the disciple bands, D bands, were not my idea. I didn't come up with this. Whose idea was this? Any ideas? Jesus said, go make disciples. Jesus started this by making disciples. He said, you go make disciples. This is his idea. And you know what? Let's see. Shall we promote it or shall we oppose it? That makes us like Gaius, or it makes us like Diotrephes. It's up to you. I would suggest doing this face to face with somebody. And I'm not doing this so I can say, hey, I get my way with you. Ha ha. No. It's a benefit. It's a benefit. Because without this walk of faith, we've got nothing. Without faith, you don't please him. You're not rescued. There is no justification without faith. Lord, without it, I am nothing. I am nothing. I am nothing. I am nothing. I am